welcome. Sorry for the delay. I had some mix-up messages, and plus I saw the Barbie movie last night, so I'm just still recovering from that, from whatever that was, whatever went down in that movie. I think it was needed. I'd rather see a movie about Barbie than the atomic bomb, so there we go. That's where I stand. So anyway, welcome to those who are new. And I am Lama Rod, and Atlanta is queer, by the way. And yeah, I use he, him pronouns. I'm here on this land, which is historically, traditionally, Cherokee, Muskogee, and Creek land. And I'm happy to be with you all. I've been away for 2 weeks, just doing some personal stuff, and I'm glad to be back with you all for a little bit. And please say hello in the chat if you want, introduce yourself if you want as well. Again, welcome to those who are new to this practice. This is the practice of Chenrezig. And in my next book, New Saints, I talk about Chenrezig as well. And I think in my next book too, that I'm beginning to write, I think I'm going to do some more writing around Chenrezig as well. Chenrezig has been very important for me in my practice. Yeah, because Chenrezig is about love, right? And I think love is what we're needing right now. And I, of course, if you've read anything from me, and I do encourage you to read something by me. I'm getting too many people who don't engage with my work, and they get really shocked when I say things. I'm like, I did mention this in Love and Rage and Radical Dharma and all the other handful of essays I've published in anthologies. So, you know, as I've talked about in other books, and I talk about in New Saints as well, just how much it took for me to really understand love in a way that felt realistic and not so romanticized. Of course, there are different kinds of love. I'm sorry, there's a lot of incense happening. I love incense, so this is kind of how I roll through life. But yeah, it just took me many years to really understand and embody an ethic of love that seemed realistic, that seemed embodied and somatic, that seemed really strong enough to meet the lack of love, I would say, in the world. And I think that, like, it gets real cliche, right? Our relationship to love and our understanding of love gets real cliche, but, you know, just to reiterate that love is the strongest force that we could ever embody. I would say even more so than compassion, you know, but for me, at this point in my practice, love and compassion are really kind of intermingled for me. It's a real kind of integration where when I'm talking about love, I'm also talking about compassion. When I talk about compassion, I'm also talking about love. And you'll see that in New Saints, some of this like work, this integrative work around love. But love, yes, being the greatest force, because love is really about wanting people to be free. Ultimately, love is just wanting people to be free, right? To be free from suffering, to be free from the causes and conditions of suffering, to be free, you know, from the illusion of duality and the binary as well. Next week, along those lines, I will be, my team will be introducing a new lecture series that I'm doing later this summer based upon the Heart Sutra. It was the integration of the Heart Sutra and spiritual abolition. And of course, love is the center of that. It's the heartbeat of abolition work, right? If love isn't in abolition, then you're not doing abolition, right? Abolition work is really about freedom, wanting people to be free, wanting people to have the resources that they need to be well, and happy and safe, right? Wanting that for others, but first and foremost, wanting that for ourselves, right? And this is why the work of love is so hard, right? Because this is really about the work that we're doing to tend to ourselves, to love ourselves, because it's the love for ourselves that we extend to others, right? It's because I want to be free, I can naturally extend that aspiration to others, right? And so if you look at the world right now, like if you look, particularly here in America, I know people are coming in from different countries, but fascism is rising in every country right now, including countries where people don't think fascism can take place is actually happening. But fascism arises, this hate arises, particularly in America right now, because there's so many people who actually don't love themselves, right? If you don't love yourself, if you don't want yourself to be free, then how can you want that for others, right? If the only thing that you know is rigidity, and compartmentalizing and shutting down, that's what you're going to give the world. That's what you're going to offer in your relationships, So many of us have been in particularly intimate relationships with partners who actually hate themselves, and it's really hard, right, to be in relationships with folks like that, because the suffering that they're in is just naturally, right, gets expressed into spaces around them, into relationships that they're in. So this is why Chenrezig is incredibly important, because it's about the heart opening, but it's more than just like a meta practice or a loving kindness practice that we're doing, right? We're working on the energy body level, the subtle energy level. Like, this is what we're doing here. So this is why everything that I do is very different than what you may have maybe encountered in more traditional Orthodox Tibetan Buddhism, right? What I was trained in, but for me, it's like, let's just get to the roots. Let's just start working with energy. Let's start opening the heart, right? Let's start working with sound. Let's start working, with the breath. Like, let's start working with visualization, which is Vajrayana practice by all means, right? But also moving beyond form into the emptiness, spacious elements and qualities of the practice, right? So I'm not so much interested in what Chenrezig looks like. I'm much more interested in what the experience of space feels like, because it is the experience of space space is the primary experience from which love arises and compassion arises. Without space, there's no transformation, there's no liberation, right? So space is what we're working with, and we're doing that particularly in the subtle energy body, right? So the subtle energy body, the system of chakras and energy channels, right? And you can feel that a little bit. I think everyone has some capacity to connect to their energy bodies, but of course, that capacity varies. But even just initially, before we begin and get into the practice, just actually turning your attention and just like casually noticing energy. And what does that feel like, right? So what does it feel like to begin to notice the subtle energy body? For many people, you get into subtle energy through the breath. This is pranayama, right? The breath and prana, they ride together. You know, they're a partner. This is why breath work pranayama is so integral in this tradition, because through the breath we can get into energy, but the breath isn't the only way to touch into subtle energy, right? So even for me, in this moment, turning my attention to this energy. And first you can begin to notice heat, like heat is energy, right? So that's an expression of subtle energy. You can begin to notice like a kind of I would say energy field. And for those of you who've trained in Reiki, like you may get this a lot more easier, because this is what we do in Reiki. Practice is like you're learning to notice this, what we call in my lineage of Reiki, the bioenergy field, right? It just feels like maybe like a field of like warmth that maybe kind of like you feel around your fingers or your limbs. Another way to do this too, which we would do when I was training, is like putting our palms together and beginning to feel that space between your palms, that heat. It may feel like electricity, a kind of like sparkiness, like little needles, like when your limb falls asleep, you feel the needles, that's energy. You begin to feel that sparkiness, that energy. We call it energy, the heat. And over time, this is something that we begin to rest our attention in, and then our attention can slowly begin to expand. To expand into that energy. And even from whatever you're sensing between your palms, you can actually write it back into the body. And you can begin to feel that kind of energy, warmth, heat, actually pulsating through the body. And of course, thoughts and emotions are energy, right? So again, staying really informal, really open, really light. And if you're working with the breath, you can just slightly notice the breath. If you're not working with the breath, just stay somewhere that feels really stable and neutral. And that's always the practice. When we feel a little bit unstable, just regulate it, returning back to just something really tangible, heavy, solid. But even here, right, one of the safeguards that we have when we start working, getting into energy, is the earth itself, you know. And the earth is an expression of, elementally, an expression of form, of solidity, of foundation. So whenever I'm doing practice, meditation practice, asana practice, ceremony, shamanic work, whatever it is, I always start with inviting the earth to rise to hold me and to tend to me as I lean into working with energy and space. So this is kind of the union of the Heart Sutra, particularly form and emptiness, right? Form and emptiness can be practiced together in what I call a sacred duality. Sacred duality. That this dualism of space, emptiness, and form, or energy and earth, can be practiced together. And when brought together into a union, then we begin to experience a deeper kind of liberation into space. Like you can let go a little more into space because the earth as form is really grounding our bodies, holding our bodies, anchoring us. And it's okay if this feels super, super abstract and out there. We're just experimenting. This isn't the main practice. I just, just think it's like always important just to experiment, just to see certain things, to experience certain things. And just a little while longer before we transition. And what does it feel like to feel the groundedness of earth and form as you're leaning more into energy and space? And so let's just begin to move into our main practice. And of course, you can just shift and get readjusted or take a short break, before we move into our practice. And we're going to do a really very, I think every practice if I do is subtle. That's not the feedback that I get from you all. But like, I really do intend this to be a very subtle practice today. Where we're just going to be working again, this is Chenrezig's Ring of Fire. And the next stage, well, there's going to be multiple stages of this practice, coming down, coming out. And of course, these stages move at their own pace, so I can't really give you a timeline. But eventually, Chenrezig, we will be transforming to Mahakala at some point down the line into a fierce Dharma protector, and that's going to be a whole different range of energy, because all the Mahakalas, the Dharma protectors in Tibetan Buddhism, are Chenrezig, actually. So Chenrezig's wrathful form is a fierce Dharma protector. So we're going to get to there at some point. It may be next year or the year after. I don't know. I can't really say. But the ring of fire, the heat is always really important. I know sometimes we're not always working with the fire element, but the fire is how we're going to start awakening down the road in the, maybe the far future. The fire is how we start awakening the fierceness of our hearts, of Chenrezig's heart, and transforming into, into these wrathful beings, which are just deeply loving, compassionate beings. I think this is the energy that we're needing right now for the world of fierceness, a fierce love, right? A fierce love for ourselves, which is depleted for many people. If it's depleted for ourselves, it's going to be depleted for others around us, right? But that fierceness, the strength that comes from us, like we're not absorbing anything from the outside, even though sometimes we visualize taking energy and care from our benefactors, particularly in the homecoming circles, right? But it's really, we're just awakening what's already present for us in our bodies and in our minds. But anyway, that's coming down the road. But right now, we're going to be working with a little bit of warmth, beginning really down in, I'm not going to use necessarily chakra points, but just down in the pelvis area, just beginning to awaken a little bit of warmth, and allowing that warmth to really float up into the heart chakra, to begin just to gently open, massage, relax the heart chakra, working with Chenrezig's mantra. And this is astrologically, Venus, I think, is in retrograde. There's always something retrograding. But what I understand, I'm not an astrologer myself. I don't follow astrology too closely, but from what I've been told, this is a period of kind of digging into some old narratives around love and care, past relationships, kind of excavating, some of those energies and tending to it. So this may be a thing for us, as we move into the practice. All the old love, all the old hurt from love, right? From particularly conditional loving, right? Which always leaves woundedness. This is why love is so risky, because you love doesn't mean things turn out the way that you want them. We can love someone really authentically and still get our hearts broken in many ways, and that's okay. right? And I know that like that's fearful, that's a fearful experience, but personally, I had to come to this place where I had to let go of being afraid of the brokenheartedness, right? Which I always talk about. Brokenheartedness is what I talk about in every book, in every talk that I give, right? But brokenheartedness is really, really important for me because I don't want to ignore it, right? Nor do I want to react to it, shutting down even more, but I want to stay open. As you stay open, you get clearer, right? You get clearer about the choices that you're making to reduce harm for yourself and for others, right? But you're still feeling the pain, right? You're still feeling the suffering, and that's okay, right? Because you're not the only one. I'm not the only one. You're not the only one in the world with brokenheartedness, right? This is part of being human, right? And the relative, like we're embodied beings in a relative experience. Of course, this is going to happen. Like this isn't extraordinary to move through brokenheartedness. So hopefully, so much of this practice can tend to that brokenheartedness as well. So let's begin. And I just invite you at the top of the practice to really awaken your intention and aspiration for practice, right? And in general, we're practicing to experience liberation, to experience a reduction of suffering for ourselves, and ultimately for all beings. This is the only reason I practice, is to get free and to get others free. We're not practicing to look good. We're not practicing, you know, to do whatever. We're practicing only because we want to get free, and we can't get others free until we begin to experience freedom and a reduction of harm and suffering for ourselves. So that's our aspiration practice. And when you're ready, I invite you to awaken or to call into your space just all of your benefactors. And when I say benefactors, just all the beings who love us, who care for us, right? And of course, you can move through the 7 homecomings practice here, but just calling to the space all the beings who actually want us to be free. And you don't have to know who these beings are necessarily, but say, as I often do, any being who wants me to be free, I invite you into the space. And those beings who do not want me to be free, I uninvite you and I ask you to stay outside of this circle that I'm creating for myself. And once you feel that some of these beings have gathered, and of course, just believing that they're here is great. You know, you don't have to see anything else or sense anything else beyond that, right? But when you're just ready, just beginning to imagine that these beings around you begin to radiate the energy of deep care for you. And that energy of care just begins to illuminate around you. And slowly we begin to imagine that they begin to radiate that energy of care into the root or our tailbones, the root of our spine or our tailbones. Just at the base of our bodies, feeling that deep care just radiating streams right down into the root of our spine. And that energy begins to form, to collect itself and form into a pearl of light at the base of the spine. And the pearl of light begins to glow even more intensely. And it slowly begins to transform into this flame. So this little flame begins to appear, transforming from the ball of light into this little flame at the base of the spine. And this flame, this fire, is the warmth of deep care. Like this is the elemental experience of care in our bodies, this warmth, this flame, the light that irradiates through the body. And to go further, I invite you to imagine that you're actually inhaling into that flame. And when you inhale into the flame just grows maybe 2 or 3 times bigger. Not too big, but just 2 or 3 times bigger. So your breath, as you're inhaling into the flame, feeds that flame, growing it. So you don't necessarily, aren't necessarily feeling heat, though you could and you may, but you're not necessarily having to feel that heat, but just a sense that there is this really powerful expression of care at the root of the spine. And you may feel on top of that somatically, like physically, some openness, maybe some like fluid kind of movement, maybe even warmth, you know. So to go even further now, so as you're breathing into the flame, we're going to exhale, and we're going to do an internal exhale. So we're going to breathe into that flame and then exhale some of that warmth and that light up into the heart chakra, where that energy begins to be released into the heart chakra, where that energy with the breath begins to really tend to the heart, beginning to awaken and expand the heart chakra, which of course is associated with Chenrezig. So you're breathing into the flame, exhaling up, really up the central column, which runs parallel to the spine, up through the central column into the heart chakra. And noticing as you're doing this, what images, what experiences, began to awaken for you. And now we're going to move into a very subtle chanting of Chenrezig's mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. And as you begin to, we're going to hum it to begin with, and we'll see where we go from there. But continuing with the breath, but as you hum, you may actually just maybe let go of the breath and just have the sense that the warmth from the flame at the bottom of the spine is actually just moving up, floating up into the heart chakra, the heart center. And right before, also before we begin, just, really the cultivation that we're trying to get to is just an expansion and an opening of the heart center for now. So just resting in that experience as we begin the chanting practice, okay? We'll begin. Mm, 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 mm. And now just beginning to hum it silently in your mind, the, the mantra. So not making any sound, but just feel the mantra continuing. And the warmth from the base of the spine circulating up into the heart chakra. And when you're ready, allowing that internal mantra to begin to dissolve into the space and emptiness of your mind. And letting go of the flame and the heat or the warmth or whatever you may be feeling. Letting the earth rise to meet you and the sea hold you. And letting your awareness expand out to mingle with space and emptiness. Holding everything that arises, but not fixating on anything. But just let everything move and float within the expansiveness of your awareness. Letting your awareness mingle with, or maybe even dissolve into emptiness itself. And so when you're ready, beginning to return your attention back to the seat and the weight of your body, coming back into a sense of groundedness, beginning to acknowledge our bodies once again. And we can begin to slowly reawaken our bodies through very simple, slow movement. Even maybe some deep cleansing breaths, breathing into your nose, out of the mouth. Doing that 3 times. Okay. Thank you all so much for your practice. I want to open up the rest of our time to questions that you may have. And you can put questions in the chat. That's fine, or you can come on, unmute yourself too, if that seems easier. Okay, from Lauren Finn. I find going to the pelvis really grounding, and it nearly sent me to sleep to begin with. How to work with that? Yeah, I'm a fan of going to sleep, so I'll just say that. you know? So I'm not a meditation teacher who's gonna actually always be like, well, you have to fight the sleepiness, because I believe often that we don't get enough rest. I think that when we feel drowsiness during sleep is a way that our bodies are saying, okay, we need to take a nap. So, all this. Okay, focus. Um, Now this is too much now. I have to put this over here. Um, yeah. So yeah, because there are different ways to see this, and as I was just saying, sometimes we should pay attention to those signs of drowsiness or sleepiness, and maybe follow that sometimes. But of course, when we actually want to stay present, so when you're working with that, really strong, kind of like this kind of like deep grounding that's taking us into a really ultra state of relaxation. Really, it's the instruction is to make the sleepiness or the drowsiness an anchor. So instead of like actually just like letting it lead you, you actually hold it and you notice it, you experience it, and you say, okay, I'm feeling, tired, I'm feeling sleepy, I'm feeling, super relaxed. And just keep noticing like that. And for me, I do like mental noting, where I'm actually just saying these things to myself mentally, saying, oh, I'm experiencing sleepiness. Okay, what does that feel like? So I'm staying really active mentally like that when I'm working with these strong energies, um, relaxing me. So that's one way. Um, but also, like this kind of work really takes us into a different level of consciousness. It's a higher level of consciousness, which can be really generative. And the more you're working with this, the more this becomes a little more apparent and evident in our practice that you're not just falling asleep, you're actually moving to another level of consciousness where a lot of things can happen a lot easier. So the analytic mind, this kind of present mind that we're experiencing now can get in the way of certain things. But when we kind of transition to these higher levels of consciousness, which may feel like sleep, but still has a little bit of awareness, then there's a lot of fluidity, a lot of movement can start to happen. That can be extremely generative, right? And some of you do that already too. I think some of you do that. Um, yeah, you just seen some interesting things. Yeah, yeah, you're just expanding, right? You're a higher vibration, so you're getting a bunch of data that you're not necessarily aware of right now, in this kind of vibrational level of consciousness. Yeah, so that's like maybe we can call it a trance state. Um, but that's a state I think like many indigenous cultures calls that space different things as well. But but yeah, I just say higher levels of consciousness. Of course, there are different levels of consciousness that we study in early Buddhist practice as well. So yeah, um, I would just like if just experimenting with that, kind of going into that space, I think can be really really interesting for some of us. And that's a space again for me that I go into often as well when I'm working with energy. And I have to like kind of ride that, particularly if I'm leading a practice. You're like, if I go off, I'm gone. See you later, and like, I don't know how you all are going to get back if I leave. But so for me, like, this is why, like, I'm using Palo Santos today, but like, this is why I use like really earth based kinds of like medicines and scents, because that's for me um, really keeps me grounded. It keeps me like if I were just practicing on my own, I wouldn't need any of this because I wouldn't have to stay present for you all. Like I could just go off and do my thing and have experiences. But because of that, I use this as a tool to stay grounded as well. So I hope that was helpful.
Very, very helpful. Thank you. Really appreciate that. It was super interesting to see it in that light. So I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
absolutely. Thank you. I think I see Finn. Hello, Finn. And hey.
Hi, Bobby.
I want
Yay.
to say something if there's time.
Yeah.
Oh,
Uh-huh.
um, I've realized, I think for the first time ever, that when I'm feeling some kind of lack or something that I don't understand, um, or pain or whatever, um, that when I start to grasp for something,
Mm-hmm.
it might solve that. And it could be anything.
Right.
And I'm not talking about a drink or something like that. Whatever. I realize that that moment of grasping is actually where I'm starting to shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never thought about that before. It's like, yeah, just letting go.
Yeah, the grasping, it starts creating a kind of mm, like contraction.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's
And
like, yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I think the other thing that I also just want to say, because I'm interested in it, and I hope other people are too. But as I've said here before, said to you before, I'm just really doing this deep dive into Howard Thurman, and his saying was he writes about the whole thing, all the thing, everything is about the unity of everything.
Yeah.
And he was saying, that was basically Jesus' message, is that everything is all one, and that the method to realize that oneness is love.
Yeah.
And so today was really wonderful. I just want to thank you for the practice. It was just wonderful to be bringing all that, because I'm kind of really in it right now, into this. It was incredibly helpful. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the new saints, I'm doing a deep dive into the Trinity of God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and actually putting that into conversation with some of these elements in Vajrayana, practice as well, and trying to understand all of this as, a returning back to what I call the essence, or Buddha nature, or emptiness, or God, right? I'm not the first to do this, this thinking, but um, I think it's important right now for us to kind of like understand that so many great, practitioners, thinkers, whatever you may call them, mystics, whatever, um, so many of these beings have emerged and continue to emerge to lead us back into this essence, this oneness, through this cultivation of love, right? It's always, at the end of the day, always love, Or often, sometimes I've been saying that when in doubt, choose compassion. But that's love and compassion, right? When in doubt, choose love and compassion. But in New Saints, I call love and compassion care, awakened care. So choose awakened care,
Yeah, I just had this new image of that parable. It's not a parable, it's a story of the feeding the loaves and the fishes to all the multitude. And the sense I had was what was going on at that gathering was an immense display of love, just an immense display of love.
Yeah.
And that there was an immense sharing of love among all the people who were there, and the whole magnetism of the whole thing was love.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just nice to have this moment today, because that's kind of where I am, and then to have this fit right into that. So thank you. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rachel. I see there's a question here in the chat. Let's see, I think everyone can read it. I find that I'm having a tougher time working with thought energy than feeling emotional energy in practice. I feel like the feeling energy tends to move and I experience space around it, whereas I feel like I get pulled out of the practice when thought energy comes up. Right, thoughts or tips, yeah. So this difference that you're experiencing between thoughts and feelings. Yeah, because it sounds like you're feeling that the thoughts, as energy feels a little more solid than, emotional energy. And it's really, once you feel that you're kind of clinging to a thought like that, then it's like, okay, noticing that clinging and then returning back to the space to hold that, to hold the thought itself. So another way of saying it too, or thinking about it, is like sometimes we want the thought. We have all this. We have an agenda. Sometimes we come into meditation. We're beginning to notice thoughts and emotions, and we have all this agenda. We want our thoughts to do this. We want this and that to do whatever. But instead, just saying, all we're doing is just noticing and allowing, right? And when we find ourselves maybe attaching or getting fixated, just returning back and saying, you know what, I just want this thought to be free within this natural occurring spaciousness of the mind, right? And letting a thought return back to its natural fluidity and movement in the same way that you're recognizing feelings as being naturally fluid and moving as well. Um, yeah. Um, yeah, let's see. But paying attention, so when we talk about getting pulled out of practice, sometimes, you know, I'm not saying this is happening for you, but sometimes we we think we're practicing and we're not. And so when we start paying attention, it may not feel as great as what we were doing previously, but when we start paying attention and noticing, then we actually are practicing, you know? And so we go from like this kind of zoned out, kind of floating experience back into presentness, which feels like a jolt. But that jolt is an indication that we're actually moving back to like a real kind of awareness of everything, which means that we have to like actually notice things that may be unpleasant because we were like bypassing all these thoughts and going into a state or an experience that felt like it was very pleasant, if that makes sense, right? Um, yeah, I mean, it's easy to bypass or to want to bypass uncomfortable or whatever feels uncomfortable, you know, to go into a state that feels really pleasant. But that's not exactly what we're doing in meditation. You know, we're not trying to, our first intention of meditation is not to bypass, but to notice, right? To name, to see, right? To become aware of, right? To become aware of both the good and the bad, right? And you take them both together, then you have the natural mind and the second, you know. Um, it's only through holding what we experience as pleasant and unpleasant, holding both of those experiences together, do we actually begin to expand through and into the emptiness from which, um, both thoughts and feelings arise from. Well, everything arises, you know. Um, so I hope that's helpful to that um, as well. But we are a couple minutes past time, so thank you.
Victoria has her hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't notice. Hey.
That's all right. If we are over time,
Oh, yeah, we'll take a yeah. What's your question?
okay. Well, if it's not a question, so it was to kind of contribute a little something about what you were just talking about.
Uh-huh.
Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I totally agree that, when we sit and on the cushion or on the chair and we're trying to meditate, that of course thoughts will come up, and you, like you said, so it's okay because that's what our mind does, and yet thoughts come from who knows where, and then they go away, and there's always another one to replace it. And feelings kind of do that too. And in my practice, I've kind of found, well, actually, when I started learning about Buddhism, the biggest issue for me was, what do you mean give up my ego? I like my ego. What is this nonsense about giving up ego? And that has turned out to be my portal. That has turned out to be my entryway. And I keep waiting for the teachers that I listen to, including my primary teacher, to talk about that, because it's very subtle and pervasive at the same time. And about identifying, because it's the ego that's doing the grasping or having the aversion and the clinging. It's the ego. All of that is the ego. So we have to really look closely at what that is. I think, and you can use that then as a practice, actually. And that helps you recognize when you are grasping and when you're pushing away, and you can always ask, wait, who's doing that? Because is that my true nature, or is that my ego, my relative self, as opposed to the total inner self? And it begins to give you a way to start embracing everyone in that unity, and allowing that love out to embrace everyone. But there's a whole lot of self-recognition that has to go on.
Yeah, the self-recognition and the experiencing of ego as well.
Yes.
Experience. Yeah, and that's the heartbreaking work too. Is the experience, like, because there's no freedom without truth, and so
Right.
so you start this process. It's about truth telling, right? And that becomes a path.
Right.
You
It can
know.
be very painful sometimes, but the more I experience it, the more I recognize this is what I have to do. I have to do this, and I want to do it. It got to the point where, no, I really want to do this.
Yeah, that's what happened. That's what happened to me too. It like, I hated this. I dreaded it. This work, like the pain, the suffering, the trauma, particularly, has been really overwhelming. But then you move through it, and you begin to have this deep experience of space and fluidity, and that makes it worth it, right? To move from rigidity into this incredible space, which I call potential, right? That's worth it. But so many of us are afraid of that. We're afraid because the ego, the self, is just like this collection of impressions and sensations and thoughts that that gets like orbited together, and then we say, oh, there must be something, when it's not. The ego is contraction, and we're self-identified with the contraction, when instead we should be identifying with the space itself. Am I the earth, or am I the universe, or am I everything? As well.
And it also helps you recognize that in your aversions, when you meet somebody or you see somebody doing something, you get, oh, I don't like that. Well, the people you dislike are most likely the reflections of what you don't like about yourself.
Yeah.
And that helps you turn that mirror and say, oh, I can't judge that person because I do that same thing too. Let's be more compassionate to myself.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Absolutely. Yeah. There's just
recognize-
one more comment in the chat, and I'm also aware of time.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, no, you're beautiful. You both are so beautiful. Thank you.
So just one more. Just like briefly with Sarah here. Yeah, it's definitely the obstacle of really wanting ourselves to experience love, like, and care. And that becomes, yes, absolutely an obstacle at the beginning of our practice, because sometimes we actually don't know how to name what we need, or we don't think we deserve care and freedom and safety and love, because maybe we never had that. We never had it. We weren't raised to think that we deserve that. So many things, right? And that becomes that block, or that thought, just really just a thought that says, I don't deserve this. That becomes something that you're asking your benefactors to take care of. Like, may all the beings who want me to be free, may they actually radiate a deep sense of care into this thought, this thought experience, of not feeling like I deserve this, right? So you let it go and offer it to the care of your benefactors. As I often do, I offer everything to the earth, right? When I'm doing mother practice, or working with Tara, excuse me, I imagine I'm offering everything to the mother, including my fear, my lack of love for self, and so forth. Offer everything to the feet of the mother. Okay. So thank you all so much for your practice. Join us again. Join me tomorrow night. We're going to be back with Medicine Buddha practice tomorrow night, and that can be just a continuation. We do very similar work, but we're doing particularly healing work, based on the lineage of Medicine Buddha, but very similar practices as well. And we dedicate, all the merit that we've accumulated to the liberation of all beings right now. And we have to keep doing this over and over again, because we need more and more merit in the world right now. And this merit creates the causes and conditions for real change to start happening, right? It's like, sometimes I think of merit as the lubrication that gets things done, So we want to make it easier for light and love and compassion and joy to be present in this world right now, to combat the hate and the lack of compassion that we're all experiencing in some form. Okay, but may all of us be free from all the conditions of suffering. All right. Well, thank you all so much, and I'll see you again, hopefully this week, in some online activity as well. So thank you all.